As sentient beings, we find ourselves thrown into a world that inflicts immense pain and suffering. So having the option of a graceful exit should be seen as a basic, universal human right. Since our existence is better to never have been, we should all have the right to die. Welcome to The Right to No Longer Exist, a Right to Die podcast, featuring your hosts, Danny, Kevin, and Amanda. In this show, we attempt to change the perception of society's views of voluntary euthanasia and what true autonomy could look like.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the third episode of the Right to No Longer Exist podcast. I am here with Danny and Kevin, and I'm Amanda. And today is our first episode with a special guest. Everybody, please welcome Sam. He is of the YouTube channel Sam and Me and the Other I, and he is a Right to Die activist in South Africa. And we're so pleased to have him here with us today. So I'm going to hand you over to Danny with the first question. And just so excited to get into this.
Yeah, thank you for being our first guest. The first question is, who is Sam?
Well, that's a difficult question. It depends on, I think if you were to metaphysically analyze me, I would say that I'm someone who loves music, I love drawing, I love a lot of compartments. And well, where I'm from, I would say I was born in Kenya. And I moved to South Africa at an early age. My whole life I was moving around. I also went to Tasmania. Then I went to Dubai, and I studied mathematics, biology, university, and it's my passion in mathematics and music and such. And it's spiraled into a tapestry of interesting events where I start to analyze myself. I think from a very early age, I thought of myself as quite different, Danny. And I saw something was wrong with the world, at a very early age. And I realized that there's more that I could be. There's more that I could do for the world. And I believe just a voice could be dropped in the bucket of change. I think if you were to ask, who is Sam? I'm an identityless to anyone else. But to myself, I'm everything, depending who's asking the question. But that's a TLDR version, to quote Reddit of who I am, I guess. A very short version. If there's any specific questions, I can answer that for you as well.
No, that was great. Thank you for that. Sorry, did I interrupt you at all, Danny?
Oh, no, not at all.
Can you give us a bit of a brief overview of the state of right to die laws in South Africa? It's definitely a part of the world I know virtually nothing about insofar as, the state of the right to die movement. And I think you offer a fascinating perspective in that regard. So, yeah.
Yes, Amanda, from what, the right to die in South Africa isn't really moving to the trajectory that the global right to die movement is moving, simply because we have our own state of affairs. I do think that because we are a union of people who are in some way, we're still very religious. We won't really see ourselves as a technocracy, not a theocracy, but we are pretty religious. And I do think our religious obstinance in that regard to the right to die is keeping us from getting, further, or from exponentiating this movement. What it is currently is, it is so that a terminally ill person, for instance, let's say you are terminally ill and you've been diagnosed and you have 6 months left to live, you can approach the state. I do know that it's 2 or 3 cases who, approached the state and said, I really want an assistant dying and such, but it's a very complicated, laborious process to actually do this. I understand there's like 2 or 3 people who were able to do that in the last, I think, 20 years or something. I could be wrong about it. But that's basically the process. It's actually a very, it's not really as binary as you get with overseas. You want to die, you have 6 months left to live. And I know it's very laborious even so, but it's much less, stringent in that regard. I think in South Africa, you have to approach the state with the High Court, with approach them with a specific request, and then asking them you such and such, and you want to approach them with this right to die. Do they have physicians? And you obviously need to have a physician before. So you got to approach them with a physician. a willingly physician to be able to get there. And then the state's got to basically tell you, oh, yes, you can, but it's very loose. And I don't think it's as, it's not like say in New Zealand, where you have stringent criteria they've got to meet and it's specified. It's not so in South Africa. You've got to be it's a very loose legislation. So yeah, it's definitely not what we have in Canada or in Australia or New Zealand. And the state can just say no to you if they feel that you're not. So it's in a way very fascist in that way. So yeah.
It sounds like your laws are a lot like America's Death with Dignity Act.
I'm not. Yeah, I definitely think I'm not really sure about that, because in Oregon they have the Death with Dignity Act, right? You know, that it's much more like New Zealand or Canada with the global Death with Dignity unions. I think in Oregon is like, but you're right, it's state provided. So the states are different depending on where you're going in the United States. Africa is very different in that regard. I agree with you, Danny. I think I'm not really sure about the USA because the states mandates the different corollaries and laws to the right to die. For instance, I know in Oregon and Vermont, I think they have the right to die laws, but everywhere else you have to basically travel to get terminally ill made. So yeah, I think it's much like that. It's not a constitutional process of a stepwise function. It is much more. The state basically have to say, well, you know, you qualify, you can die. There's no process that you're really going to go through that's as easily put as, you know, what you get in Canada, for instance. I think you're right.
Yeah, those numbers are tiny. You know, it's only 200, I think, per year that actually end up utilizing the Death with Dignity Act. So it's kind of like, I wonder if it's just based on just so much troublesome of getting to that process where you're the application and you have to see 2 physicians and then, you know, psychiatrists, and there's just so much red tape to it. You know, it's like people probably give up halfway through, you know, the process. They're just like, whatever, I don't even care anymore, you know. But yeah, exactly. I would say Kevin, that in a process that is less mandated, it would be easier because you have more people that can basically, if you can go to the state and say, you know, you have an inquest and say you want to die, the state could. Why does it have to be terminally ill that you have to approach them? You could be approaching them, let's say, for a mental illness that's getting aggravating. But I also think it's easier when you have specific benchmarks that you can meet. For instance, like you have in Canada, where it says, if you this and this and this, because I don't think the state can really deny you should you meet those benchmarks. For example, in Canada, you have specific benchmarks that you have to tick off before you can get made, right? Whereas, like you said, in the USA, you don't really have that. So you have one person that decides, hey, this person is rationally induced, he can die. I can't really talk about those laws, but I think you're right. There's a lot of red tape to it, and I think that, yeah, well, Canada definitely has a lot red tape, a lot less red tape to that process. But I'm also aware that in 2023, you guys are going to have the MAID less restrictive for mentally ill people. You know, am I right if I'm saying that? I think it's 2023 or something that you're going to have a law in Canada. You guys are, where you guys are based? Where are you guys currently?
I'm in Chicago, Illinois.
Are you guys in okay, wow. Okay, so I thought you guys were, okay, so none of you guys are Canadian.
No.
No worries. So I think in Canada, it's quite interesting because if you're a permanent resident, you can qualify for, you know, MAID if you are mentally ill. And it's a grievous suffering for you. You can qualify for that. But I don't think it's going to be as easy. Like a lot of Canadians told me, you know what, Sam, I'm so glad to be, you know, a Canadian because in 2023 we're going to qualify for the mentally ill subjugation that's going to happen there. But I don't think it will be that easy because it's still a medical model. And we have to try and get away from the medical model because the medical model is pigeonholing people to say, you guys are patients. That's how the constitutions view us. They view us as inpatients, as people that should be controlled. In the medical model, and the pro-lifers, of course, borrow from this idea and view people as pawns. They view people as, you know, they can decide for themselves. They are basically invalids. And this is what we need to try and get away from. But I don't think that 2023 is going to mean a breakthrough. I think it's still going to be as difficult to qualify, just as with the terminally ill acts. I know a lot of Canadians told me, Sam, we are glad to see 2023 because finally Canadian right to die would open up for the mentally ill people. But I would tell them, I can probably bet my stakes it's going to be just as bloody hard to get to MAID, that, even with mentally ill being one of the provisions. So yeah, sorry, I was kind of going on in a derivative here.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, no, that's so true. I mean, it'll be really interesting to see how the process of a mentally troubled person is going to be able to have an application, and who gets to dictate.
Exactly. Who gets to decide? Yeah.
Clearly, even if you're mentally, struggling in any way, like suffering itself, I think is a separate whole compartmental thing. That's like, if they're saying they're suffering, there's like no reason to not believe them. They can say,
exactly.
The unicorns are flying in the sky. I see them. Like, and that's getting to their mental, issues specifically. And
but exactly,
say,
and also getting
hurting,
into the yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think it's Kevin. I think it's an egocentric way of, because not you. I mean pro-lifers, because pro-lifers have an egocentrism about themselves, and I think this. I don't know where this is coming from, but we as humans, we want to be above. We want to have an authoritarian way of looking at the world. I think it's very human. If you look at the way, and that's why someone once said, and I'm just going on tangent, but someone once said that great power corrupts, great power. Power corrupts, great power corrupts absolutely. Like it's a true law, just like Moore's law in kinematics. It's a true law that happens, that you could say, that you could visualize. You don't have to be a psychic to understand that when you have power and where you have power eventually do corrupt. And this is what you see. This is what you see with pro-lifers. It doesn't make sense to us. Why? You're a rational person. All of us, we're rational people, right? If you want to die, if your life is suffering and it's grievous and it's heinous and it's cruel, you just want out. Who the sorry, I was going to swear. Who the hell is going to actually deny you in the right minds? Well, people are denying us. It doesn't make bloody sense, but they're denying us. And they think they're bloody doing good, because that's exactly the prerogative of pro-lifers. They think that they're doing good because they have an authoritarian incentive. It makes them feel good to think they can have an enactment that can keep people from actually exercising. I think this is the thing. It's an ego-driven, an egomanic response to someone. I don't think it's psychopathic, but I do think there's an ego part to this. Do you guys think it's also ego-driven? What do you guys think? It definitely is ego-related.
Absolutely. I mean,
sorry.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, if you save a life by doing some sort of preventative measure and keeping that person alive or talking them off the cliff, so to speak, it's perceived as a good thing. And yeah, it's hard to really talk about these hard subjects about, well, is it really better that they stayed alive and continued to suffer? Or would it have actually been better if they died? And not that it's better to die a gruesome way, but, who knows if that person lived 40 years of utter torment. You have to talk about like the real hard questions. And I think preventionists and pro-lifers always have this optimistic view that, you save a life.
Yeah, it's almost like a seance. I call it the pro-life seances. You know how a seance is? It's almost like a seance. Right? You can see all these people, and you look at, for instance, the Are You OK groups, let's say in Canada or Tasmania. It's like groups that call themselves the Are You OK. It's ridiculous. They go on, I think, 13th September or something, and they go out and they just hassle people, and they say, "Are you OK?" Or it almost becomes aggressive to the point where it's becoming a personal attack.
Yeah, absolutely. It's offensive for sure. If you're forcing someone to be enslaved into their own body that they don't want to be in.
Exactly. I mean, we're all adults. I mean, if someone, do you really have to, basically harass someone to ask them, "Are you okay?" It becomes like, I just can't believe that these people take themselves seriously. It's just like they stand there with pom-poms and yellow shirts, and they think, and this is what I'm saying is that the Are You Okay groups are a splinter group of this psychobabble from your pro-life nonsense. They're all splinter groups. All these stuff trace back to an authoritarian regime of absolute control.
And this is what you see with the governments. This is what you see with statesmen. They're so bottled up in their own schmuck. They're so bottled up with their own nonsense. This is what they see. They're all. If you look at, what's currently happening with executions. Some of those executioners import black market drugs to be able to drive the executioner. They break their own laws to usurp their own. It doesn't make any sense. This is how crazy the law becomes.
Yeah.
They have to break their own nonsense to be able to usurp it so that they can get the drugs to actually put people out of their life. This is the type of laws we're dealing with. It has to go. We're living in the 21st century. It has to go now. We have to change. And I believe maybe we're all millennials, but if we millennials finally go onto the podium, maybe it will be better. I don't know if this crap starts with the baby boomers, but it started somewhere and it's got to go now.
There's so much paternalism that comes with even the most liberalized right to die laws that, it's hard not to call them right to die in name only.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a pedagogy with that because it's actually pretty, I can actually chuckle when I think about it, because it's the only position that the conservatives are taking a liberal seat and the liberals are taking a conservative seat, because the liberals usually should go and suck up to the governments and say, you guys have to provide. You guys, they're basically looking at a daddy, the big government. But now they're changing seats, because now the liberals are saying, fuck it, we want right to die laws. And the conservatives are like, no, we want the government to help us sanction these people. So now they're swapping seats, because now the conservatives are pro-government. Now all of a sudden they ask the authorities to help them to enslave these people, because how dare they kill themselves? How dare they jump off cliffs because they're so in pain? It's actually pretty weird, isn't it? How they're changing seats. I was just making this observation recently. But I'm not talking about all liberal people, because I was just saying that, usually, what you were talking about, liberalism going crazy, liberals tend to now change seats because the conservatives are now all of a sudden sucking up to the governments, because conservatism, well, it's the conservatives who are actually, religious also, who are actually against the right to die as such. And in general, you just see this phenomenon. But yeah, sorry guys, you can ask me the next question if you want to, or
yeah, no,
I'm
great.
all yours.
That's great stuff. This will probably be our last personal-ish question, I guess. That is to off the other two. But what got you interested in the right to die in the first place? Was there any personal experiences that you had, or was it just kind of philosophically interested, or yeah?
Oh man, everything. I tell you, philosophically, personally, practically, pragmatically, everything. I would say on a philosophical level, it makes sense that any philosopher want to imbue their own rights, Kantian and Platonic ethics. That's basically where the rights model began. Socratean logic. That's how we ask questions, and it gets you to the point where you realize. Also, my personal suffering. I think you said you have or you had OCD, right? I suffer from a very refractory form of OCD that's not going to change anytime soon, but it's one where it's almost like what's it called? Depersonalization disorder, where you feel hyper aware almost of the stuff around you.
Somatic,
like you see a glass.
OCD.
It's weird. Yeah, it's very weird too, but it's been with me my whole life now. And people don't really understand. The point is, I'm not saying, and this is kind of the thing that pro-lifers like to hook on to say, but you said so and so, and there's always room for improvement. I'm not saying that my suffering, is the root cause why I should die. I'm saying it opens up doors to see why suffering can be a cause, and it definitely opens up doors to bigger questions. My suffering was definitely tailored to opening doors to bigger questions in life. And I would say philosophically, the questions of antinatalism, for instance. Amanda made some very, very good videos on those guys. Not that I'm saying all of you guys are antinatalists, but it does show what human suffering is like. And then you grow a bit of heart to, if you grow a bit of heart to human suffering, well, it does, it transcribes to other areas, one of which is obviously the right to die, because this is ending potential suffering. Not advocating suicide, of course not, but any potential suffering. This is what we're interested in. We're a bunch of epistemologists, thinkers, who want to expand the right to options. If it's life, it's good. If it's dying, it's also good. But the ability to have that option, that's exactly what we're after. We're not sophists here. We're not saying what people should be doing. We're just saying we're calling for human rights expansion. That's all we're doing. We're innocent.
Well said, Sam.
Sorry, guys.
Thank you for that. No, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay.
Danny, do you want to answer?
Sorry, I do get a bit of artistic here because I'm so to the neck up with pro-lifers and that bullshit. I'm so sorry for swearing. I'm just so to the neck up with these people. And you can take your pet to vet today. To get euthanized, peacefully euthanized, it's almost illegal not to. But what the hell, if you're asking to be euthanized, everybody looks at you as if you're 4 hours. Well, what the hell is going on with the world? We got to do something, people. We got to do something about it. Really, I'm really passionate about it because I'm just sick of the psychobabble that we're dealt with. This gobbledygook that we have to go at every day because people put us in little boxes of tiki-taki, literally. I'm sick of this. I want this to change. I want us to go to a place where this could be, if you ever watch Chicken Run, where's that scene where those chickens were, it's a great story. It's a great movie. It's a children's movie, but I remember as a child I watched Chicken Run and there was the scene where Ginger, one of the main protagonists, she was looking at the scene and she said, eventually we will escape the chicken farm. And she was looking at those green pastures. I actually have a visual green pastures in my mind where I believe someday we're going to have a say. We wouldn't have to worry. Maybe this will never be an option that we will have to suffice. Yeah. But that would be an option. That's open for discussion, that our constitutionalists are sitting down with people and willing to discuss things, not just crossing their arms and saying, no, you guys are crazy, you're going to have to go to a psychiatric ward just because you're suicidal. That they can be openly in discussion with people. This is what I want to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would relieve just an insane amount of anxiety for the fact that you could, knowing that if you wanted to step outside and go into the green pasture, you could. But you can stay inside and look at the green pasture. And if you know that you can go out to the green pasture, it's a whole different mentality than, it's a whole different mentality than looking at the green pasture and knowing the door's locked, the windows are barred up, everything's changed.
Very interesting turn on that. I like your turn on that, Kevin. Yeah, and also I actually think that I don't really want to dictate where the conversation is going to go, but I would like to say I want to hear your options to, let's say May doesn't work out in Canada or in the United States as you guys want it. Like, what's your options to go? Do you guys have a plan? Like, it might be individually tailored, of course, because where do you think this is going to go? Are you guys just going to approach your constitutions with new suggestions, or do you think also, just like I do, we're going to probably have to approach foreign legislation or foreign decision makers to being able to enlist some sort of right model that could help everybody in this movement? Where do you think this is going to go for you personally? This also what I want to hear.
I mean, I have to be honest and say that I personally am less knowledgeable about some of these alternatives to that. Where my thinking is most set is what can we do to change the concept, the perception of the right to die socially. So the right to die as a social movement, as an artistic movement, I think as well. It needs a boost. You know what I mean? We need more.
Absolutely.
We need younger people interested in this. I mean, as trite as it sounds, we got to find some way of making this cool. We have to find
we have
some
to
way.
Stop being tacit. Yeah, exactly.
We have to find some way of getting really serious about creating infotainment around this subject, because this is one of the most fascinating, important subjects in the entire world. It is a subject that young people, I think, could be invested in tremendously if they were given the tools to be. But this is such a separate concept away from how we live as individuals. These are such off limits conversations for people worldwide until they come upon it, in some form or another. And people are lucky if they come upon it in some way or another. Some people never face these subjects until they're desperately in need of it. And that needs to change. So access to these conversations needs to increase, just the general tone and around right to die activism needs some kind of revolution. The activism itself, who it attracts, what it does, all of that, I think, needs a major revolution. And that is the part of it that I think that I hope we can do something around. In the future.
Yeah, absolutely, Amanda. I think I was looking at some statistics from the Centers for Disease Control in America. I couldn't find statistics like globally, but in America in 2019, 13 million people were said to have seriously considered ending their own lives. Now that is a lot of people. So the exit question is in a lot of people's heads, and they're not talking about it, and they're afraid to talk about it because you might be harassed and people might say, are you okay, and all that. But it should be okay to talk about wanting to die, and that's very important. And if we get those who want to die talking about this openly, and then maybe we can get the people who don't want to die talking about it with them. And then we can have some kind of coherent conversation with the world about it. And it's going to have to take, we need those who want to live to support us. That's very important. And if that happens, and then, maybe the politicians will listen to us. Maybe the human and civil rights movements will listen to us. And if they do, the laws will change. And I hope one day, the right to die or the right to no longer exist is in every constitution. That would be a wonderful end game.
Yes, that was really well said. I just wanted to add, you got to think for a second, how many of those people that are suicidal or that express some suicidality are even aware of a right to die movement? It just, the tools are not getting into the hands of those that need them. So the fight is not actually taking place. And, so we got to connect to each other, and we got to connect the philosophy to the minds that need it, and then outward from there. Yeah,
exactly. And we still have to kill the threats, because what I mean by threats is this thing of small things like, the do not resuscitate badges. For instance, you have a person that wears a do not resuscitate badge, and the person goes into coma, the person gets a heart attack prior to that, of course, goes into a coma, whatever happens. But then you get a bunch of people trying to resuscitate this person, and now the person lives with brain damage, right? But the person had the badge on that asked not to be resuscitated. Do those people face legal, do they face legal repercussions? Mostly they don't. So again, this is all these traces that exist, this pro-life traces, like being respected. That's the first thing to me, is someone who has a do not resuscitate, let's say as an example, do not resuscitate badge, should be respected. And there should be a law against potential disrespect of those people. So that's also important to balance it out. And we're still having so many of these traces in society that we got to freaking cancel out before we can progress. So yeah, we are on a sturdy foundation because we're building up, and I get it. The right to die is really progressing. But then we have these succubuses in our society, like these weird, these thorns in the flesh that keeps coming up in different ways, with the pro-life and so on. And we should, you're right, in a equanimity, we should approach a society where these laws and these states of being can be approached in a logical, epistemological manner to society, such that even the pro-lifers could agree on basic precepts of what, let's say, someone who's actively rationally suicidal can talk to them about, so that there won't be any more pro-life against anti-choice versus pro-choice arguments. Maybe in a society that's perfect, such a balance point will be found. But before we can strip the world from these ridiculousness and these pro-life harems, we will never progress fully. And that's what I think that's important, to kind of patch up the bad hole, the holes in the universe, so to speak. We got to patch up things before we can progress. And I think that's kind of my take on it, Amanda, is I see a lot of patching up to do first before we can actually progress with a full understanding. In university, they taught us, my first year, they said to me, to us as a class, they said, you can cram all the information, right? But it's not going to make you better. If you want to go to second year, you've got to really understand what you're doing. You've got to patch up the stuff to be able to progress.
Yeah.
I think it's time for society to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and to patch up the necessary holes before we can progress. And yes, we have the same view, but I think there's got to be a lot of patching up that's got to be done. And especially with the Catholics and the Catholics and the religious opposition is very, very strong, the right to die. I mean, they're already our sole opposition, actually. And what's actually weird is the pro-lifers have their own agenda, because not all of them are religious, which is actually weird in and of its own. But the popes and everyone like that, they are the main oppositional forces to the right to die. And before we can silence them somehow, and I think the answer to this might be to kind of have a legal kind of corollary that shows that if a pope has a specific predisposition to believe that the right to die is faulty, they shouldn't do so on a religious grounding. They should try and soil it on a logical grounding. So I think if the law can change in that directive, it will also be very, very useful. Because I feel a lot of people have religious groundings to make arguments that are actually faulty, right? Like popes who says, but I don't think that you should have the right to die because of, the Bible says so and so. But I think if the law changed as such to accommodate for a more logical explanation needed, the opposition would be less. And that would be better because it would be more logically based. Not that I don't say religion is wrong, of course not, because I do announce myself as a religious person. But I say when religion gets in this point where it's used solely as a driving factor to prevent stuff, this is not a good thing.
We need as many allies as we can. And one thing that I was thinking about is possibly aligning ourselves with the pro-choice movement, when it, the pro-abortion rights movement. Because we basically believe in pretty much the same thing as they do. When it comes to the right to die, it's your body, your decision. And if you want your life to end, it should be up to the individual and not the state. So that's the same kind of, logic that, was used to legalize abortion. That's just a thought I had.
I have theist friends that have, it's almost like this cognitive dissonance when you approach them about this topic and the way that the soul and the sanctity of life problem that they have to wrestle with, and yet at the same time have empathy and compassion for someone suffering. They struggle with that, and it's like, but they don't realize. And I try to talk to friends if they're close, that you don't have to struggle with that. Like, do they really think God is gonna be angry that someone's suffering is ending? I mean, any obviously intelligent creature that so much has to create whatever it's been created here, but it wouldn't be on the same page of like, hey, let's end years and years of pain.
Exactly.
It's
what you're saying is ontologically. Yeah. Sorry, Kevin. What you're saying is ontologically, there's a different framework that the religious mind is operating from, as opposed to the non-religious mind, so that the two minds could be worlds apart. For instance, the religious or theistic mind could operate from theistic principles that are permutations of specific morals that is not inbred at all in the non-theistic model, which can create a lot of havoc because there's no in between, right? And I think that's exactly what you try to say, is that because the models are so different in terms of mind, the mindfulness for a theist is different from the logical mindfulness of a non-theist because they operate from different. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, in general, basically, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. I see it. It's almost a manifestation. You talk to someone that's like, just a Christian or whatever, and you talk about the right to die, and then they say, oh, but God would want this, and then you kind of give them some logical reasons why that couldn't be the truth. And it seems to be an easy conversion, honestly. I've had some friends that are Christians, and I've converted them in a right to die way, and they just kind of, I think it can be done, is all I'm saying. Even with a complete, utter, total separate ideologies, completely separate worldviews, there can be some connecting of some dots here to where they can concede to some degree and say, okay, like, have your little weird right to die. I don't fully agree with it, but I still see how it's
there's middle ground. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe I don't know. I'm just thinking, but it sometimes seems like it when I get a positive reaction from a Christian friend or something.
Yeah, it's like, one thing about personal faith is that it should be personal. And when you use your personal faith to affect other people's right to self-determination, then yeah, that's when, a huge line is crossed.
Yeah, exactly. Just don't get these people, just a bit of a joke, but just get these people to vote in the referenda, because if they have a choice, they're surely not going to take the right to die seriously. They're going to go against it. So the bastards would be going against it. So just make sure that they don't vote in the next referendum for the right to die. If it's a theist, of course. No, I'm just joking. No, you're right, Danny. I think that there, like Kevin also mentioned, there is middle ground to this where both parties can come together and say, we at least agree that the suffering human that's suffering this much should have the ability to say, I had enough, right? There is the middle ground that could potentially be found. The problem, however, is the authoritatives of those theistic movements, like the bishops, are never, almost never at least, let's say they diverge away from that middle ground. That's what I'm seeing is you get the most opposition you get is from the bishops or from the religious leaders. And even if you get the gray area of religious advocates who might say there's a middle ground that we can say, hey, if someone is suffering enough, we would give them the ability to have the right to die. The authoritative of those religious movements are almost always opposed to that. And I think that again drives the circuits, almost like a bottleneck situation where the religious leaders are now again creating the antithesis, and they keep creating this yin and yang polarity between the religious will remain so extremely opposed and the non-religious remain extremely for it. And I think this polarity keeps somehow in the loop the whole time, because that's all. It's just from my opinion. I keep seeing the very strong religious grounds say that right to die is always wrong, right? Yes, in the middle, where people let's say more agnostic, yes, then they're a bit more open. If you look at it solely from a religious perspective, then you can draw an interpolation that the most religious people are definitely going to be opposed to it, right? But those people keep getting replaced. So they keep creating this polarity that causes there to be no middle ground, if you know what I mean. So it's almost like saying, we have religious friends that would agree with it, but the religion itself doesn't. And I think that's so eventually they get pulled back again, because I mean, they have parents or so that says, no, Johnny, but it's not actually right. You have a responsibility not to vote for the right. And then these religious people eventually just go and, they will move away slowly from the right to die that they priorly believed in, even though they have actually had, they met halfway with the atheists, so to speak. They would now, they won't vote for it, at least, because it's almost like as if they will be pulled back into opposition again. So because the religion itself is so extremely opposed, it will create this polarity effect that will draw everyone that's potentially part of its club away from the potential voting, or even as much as signing into the right to die. I think, that's just my take on it. I think that the religion itself is not a good mantle to put on for the right to die. maybe if you're not as religious, but
Well, some people don't think about it at all, and so they trying to sign up to a new church, right? They're looking for a new church, and they're on the website of the new church, and the church has its mission, whatever, our ethics or whatever, ironically, but you know, it'll say we are we're pro-life. You know, we believe the sanctity of life should be preserved at all costs, anywhere and everywhere, from pregnancy to death. You know, and then people just go, okay, I guess like I have to sign up to that to be part of a church, which is, you know, in reality just a community of people, which is all they're signing up to. But yeah, it's a problem because they sign up to something they don't even really realize they are without thinking about it. And now the church obviously has more power now, and they'll claim, especially Catholicism, they'll claim we have 2 billion people that agree for pro-life. Look at this, and it's like, not really, you know.
Yeah, they straighten these people out. They make sure that if these people had faulty beliefs, they will make sure that they keep pounding the pavement with getting all these 2 billion people who believe in that thing to not believe in that anymore, because now there's an authority figure that keeps saying, no, you're wrong. You are wrong, neighbor. So yeah, that's the problem with that, because the people aren't sole agents. They're now part of the constitution or a bigger force or whatever you want to call it. And this bigger force controls that, it layers them out. They make, you know, it straightens them out. So the straightening out is bad because it means that, of course, I'm not saying religion is bad. I'm saying if there's an authority figure that says how you should believe, this is bad. Because if the authority with a bigger grand authority is opposed, it will eventually mean that everybody will get straightened out to have, you know, to believe what the authority believes, which means if the authority is against, if the text of the authority is against the right to die, even though there's small compartments in the authority that's for the right to die, people will get straightened out again. And you're right. I think this will be solely, the right to die will be solely an agnostic, atheistic realm that will be, even though there's some Christians might believe in it, I think that the majority would obviously be non-religious people. That's just my take on it. So I think from my research, it does point to that point. You're right as well, Kevin. I think that some people are more liberal, right? They're more liberally religious, and they sign up for, let's say, church service or stuff, but they don't really conform that much to every principle or precept of the church. They just sign up because, hey, it's like with the Baha'i faith, for instance, some of the precepts make sense. It's a good moral ethic, but it's not necessarily believe in a God. And then people sign up and they call themselves religious, but they're not actually religious. But I mean, here people who are advocately religious, who are, you know, logically and metaphysically religious and believe in God. I think those people would be more opposed because they would operate from a framework of the religious texts, which are by fact usually, I mean, if we're talking about the main religions that we're aware of, are in fact opposed to right to die. So yeah, I agree with you.
You know, it's kind of a weird thing because, you know, my grandma was raised Mormon, and Mormons are completely opposed to any kind of right to die. But she supported Jack Kevorkian in the 90s because she had to witness my grandpa suffering from asbestos poisoning for 15 years. He slowly suffocated. He died in agony, and that's all it took to change her mind. I'm not sure if she would agree with how far we take it, but even though she was religious until she died, she believed that what Jack Kevorkian did was right. But also we had another member of our family who lived in San Jose who, you know, voted against the Death with Dignity Act when it was passed in California because of Mormonism. You know, the Mormons always say, endure to the end. But, you know, it's crazy how witnessing suffering can change your mind, even if you do believe in God.
That's an important point for sure.
Yeah, totally. It literally changes you. You witness this firsthand. You realize, wow, like this is it's sad, but it's a hear no evil, see no evil situation. You know, what, right to die? I don't know. Sure, like whatever. Take care of the old people, whatever. You know, give them more morphine. You know, it really is this arrogant, condescending kind of attitude. You know, same with animal factory farming, as long as it's in your sandwich, you're not really thinking about how it got there, but
Your sandwich, that's that analogy, yeah.
But
yeah, and
it's point, Danny.
Sometimes you have to put the weight on the back wheel and hope it doesn't flex, and so but yeah, I agree with you guys. I think as far as religion goes, I mean, I consider myself as a religious person, but I'm much more of a I believe ontologically in the form of God. I have a private religion, but it doesn't. But I'm a religious person, but I definitely believe in the right, and I agree with you guys, because of course you're going to get homogeneity in religious movements that would be more inviting to the right to die issues of personal suffering. And so someone has experienced, like you guys have shown here at example, let's say a husband or a wife suffering, let's say with pulmonary edema, and that person's going to choke to death, then obviously that person would be much more enticed to accepting made or potential, just the right to die, with the right to euthanasia. But as a general, I do think that religion would be, of course, opposed to it, because the text or the constitutions as in large is opposed to that. And I think that's what's going to cause the driving factor away from the right to die, even though there's particulars that you can point to that says, that there's particulars who would say that the right to die is, for them, can be utilized. That the religion itself isn't necessarily for the right, and I think that's what causes this movement not to be expansive in religious circles as opposed to non-theistic circles. So you guys are absolutely right. I agree with you, by the way. Amanda, what do you think? I haven't heard you in a long time now.
I
want to
about this specific topic about religion.
Exactly. But the religion,
and the right to die.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting because in addition to the right to die and its relationship to religion or Christianity, so I've also sort of watched the strange development of the strange relationship of Christianity to antinatalism. Like there's a huge amount of antinatalism in early Christian history, which is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And there's now a whole lot of Christian antinatalists now that are kind of coming up, which is also fascinating. And I do see a lot of I wonder a lot about how similar a future Christian antinatalist movement might be to a Christian right to die movement, or Christians that at least will be favorable to a right to die movement, and how similar or dissimilar those two movements might be to each other. Because I think that the thing that those two movements would have in common, I suspect anyway, is sort of, I think what some of what's been said here is that they will only go so far. You know what I mean? You may be favorable to antinatalism from a Christian perspective or a religious perspective, because you may have some personal experiences that make it make sense to you. You may be a Christian antinatalist that sort of honors that as part of the history of your own religion, but you're not going to be in favor of the extinction of all of mankind, let alone sentient kind. Like there's only a certain level that you're going to go, and a certain amount that you're ever gonna take it. And I think that's probably similar to what a Christian right to die perspective would be. That there's maybe a little bit, there's a certain distance that you'd be willing to go, that not only you personally can go, but that your religion is going to allow you to go, and then it's going to stop. So I think that's, regardless, it's important for those people to get to whatever point they get to with it, because any amount of movement in this conversation is important from whatever perspective you come from. But I do see potential in both of those movements, the growth in both of those movements, and I see a lot of similarity in them, but I think they will only ever go so far. I do think it's really the atheist voice that's going to carry it much further. because it just doesn't have those.
Yeah.
It just doesn't have the weight of keeping God's
Yeah,
plan
exactly.
and God's
not
creation
necessarily an atheist,
alive
but also
in the world. Yeah.
an agnostical, or I like to call it a Peterson model. I guess Jordan Peterson has, kind of outlined this idea of God being almost a tapestry of metaphysical identities.
I think even agnostics would probably only go so far, to be honest with you, because an agnostic is never going to take the position of this is the end, or we're working towards an end.
Exactly, and agnosticism is exactly. Sorry, man. I think exactly, and I think that you're right. To trail back to the atheism one again, is I do think that atheism is always going to be a position where most people would just not try to trade on that, even if they think it's true. It will always be a position that the atheistic model, I think, is always going to be the black dog in every room, because it's just a nihilistic, pessimistic view to most people, and they can't really, even if they think it might be true. There's a form of belief, and I think this does get in well with the right to die, because there's, just like with religion, and you're right, religion is definitely progressive. I mean, what Christianity is today wouldn't be in the next 100 years to 200 years, let alone the next 1,000 years. We don't know we can't tell you the future, but we know one thing. As was it Franklin who said, there's two things we know for sure, is one is death and the second one is taxes. But there's also a third one is progression, or changes. Mm-hmm. And we know that because changes is, the derivative with time, like in mathematics, there's changes to the way time and space works. And there's also changes in the world, and there's changes to religion. And it also means there's changes to everything. Nothing is permanent. Everything is temporal, and religion is no different in that regard. So you're absolutely right that with time, Christianity changes. I don't know how the precepts will be changed in terms of how people view it. For instance, let's look at the precept of God who told Abram to have as many children as he could. Let's say that were true, that religion tells you that you should be having as many children as you can. How would that be viewed differently? For instance, then that goes directly opposed, contrapositively to atheism. Sorry, not to atheism, to natalism, right? To antinatalism, rather. That if let's say the Bible says, or the book says, that you should get as many children as you possibly can, or even give an example of how someone was blessed to get as many children. If that is part of your religious texts, I don't know how progressive Christianity would be to have to drive that out in order to get anti-natalists to interpret that differently. Because I mean, if your text says that you should, or even give an example of how someone was blessed to get as many children as you possibly could, that is absolutely against anti-natalism. And I know in some religions, especially I think Islam also have it, as many children as you can. That's why they have so many children, right? So even with progression of time, these precepts will still stay intact. So maybe you're right. Maybe they will start viewing even that precepts differently in time. For instance, that maybe they will start to ask, question backwards and say, well, Allah didn't really mean this. He just meant it metaphysically. And so I do think if you can drive everything metaphysically, you can probably potentially make a good case for anti-natalism in that religious grounding. Because it's quite different, because I know in Christianity and Islamicism, or Muslim faith, it's been told to its practitioners that they should have children. It's a good thing. It is one of the axioms or the precepts of those religions. So I don't know. So I don't think you're going to have the mutual inclusivity of, at least the people who practice that religiously.
I think it will only go. I think it will only ever go so far.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a stopping point. I don't mean to in any way put a halt to this part of the conversation. This is absolutely fascinating. I just want to quickly check in with Danny and Kevin. Where are we with the order of questions? Like, did Danny go next? I do have one lined up that I think takes us a little bit back to the original question that Sam asked us. I can ask that next if you want, but if Danny, you and Kevin, or if Danny and Kevin have something lined up that you guys want to ask, go for it.
Well, I have one, but if your question,
go for it, Danny.
Okay.
No.
Okay, so I hope it doesn't disrupt the flow. In terms of supporting further liberalization of right to die laws, what would be an example of taking things too far, in your opinion?
It's a very good question. Like all your questions, I think if you look at liberalism of right to, I think a good estimation of a potential malady that could be happening is when there's no red tape. Well, red tape is a bad word by proxy, right? But let's say there's no steps of intervention, no authorities that could intervene, nobody that could care, not as much authorities. But let's say there were just people. We are in World War Z. There are doctors running around, and all these people could just inject people just like they want. This would be absolute. This would be absolute malady. You know, this would be the end effect of a system that is no system, a system with no safeguards, a system with absolute no trajectories, where anybody could murder, for instance, anybody else. This is also a system where the right to die is true, right? Let's say in the case with murdering, the right to die as a model, the end effect of the right to die is obviously death. So in the model of absolute grotesque murders or insurgencies like that, the right to die model is true. So I think in the right to die model, that's in the model where something has gone haywire in terms of the right to die, you know, model, it would be a place without any safeguards, a place where people can murder one another left, right, and center, and there's no safeguards. That's the place where the right to die model would go haywire. To step back a bit, I think that's also the one. This is ad extreme, obviously. To step back a bit, I think it's fair to state this as well, is I think where there's uncalled for justice, for instance, people are or uncalled for injustice, where people are, for instance, slipping through. I think when you have a basic law, like, you know, checking the age of the person, they should be 18. Let's say we are going to have basic safeguards in the right to die, right? Obviously, there's always safeguards, but let's say you know that the person has a specific there's a medical definition to how someone is rationally, right? The person has to be 18 years, for instance, and they have to portray a set of command that could indicate how rational they are according to the DSM or the medical models. Let's say that fails. That would obviously mean that if you were to go forward with the right to die, that would obviously be uncalled for. So it would be uncalled for. I think that's what your question is. In a case where the medical rational test wouldn't be, the benchmark test won't be passed, and the test, and you would still go through with the right to die and injecting someone or having the person euthanizing themselves as per assisted dying laws. So in a short version, it would be where the right to die model would not go as planned, as we want it to be, would be one where the medical safeguards isn't in place. Yeah, I think that's, I hope I answered it as you wanted. It's going to obviously go haywire when there's no checks. And there has to be some checks and some benchmark and some preemptive steps to make sure that people are in fact rational. And that could be done by authorities, but also by society at large. Yeah, so it's kind of my answer to this.
A really good answer. I mean, we can't have anarchy, you know.
No, of course not. I mean, but anarchy would mean murder, which would mean this would not be the world which we see anyway. So, you know, it almost won't, the rate at what it will happen won't actually, it won't really increase because of the safeguards we already have. So you're right. I mean, anarchy would indicate that the right to die would suffice, but not in the way that we would, because there would be murder, which means people would die, and the end result would be true for the right to die, but not in the way that we wanted, because wrong people die instead of the right people. So, yeah. Sorry, I give very abstract answers to your questions, I think.
No, thank you, Sam. That's great.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thanks.
So Sam, just a little bit of a background for our listeners. So we originally found you through your YouTube channel, me and the other eye, because you made a response video to us, which is something, by the way, we highly encourage people to do. A number of people have done the same. So thank you so much for doing that, Sam. I love response videos. I think all three of us do. So thank you again. And in your response video and some of your other videos about the right to die, I really enjoyed all of the thoughts you had in these videos about, how we can work together to build the movement. And one of the ideas you talk a lot about was through trying to approach foreign governments, who are open to these ideas, and try to find somebody, in power within these governments who'd be willing to represent foreigners. You call this the new frontier of the right to die movement. I think this is a fascinating idea. I haven't really personally heard anybody really bring up specifically this as a way forward. So I'd love to hear you talk more about that.
Oh yeah, sure, Amanda. It's actually something that came with me, I would say, a month ago. When did I respond to you guys? I can't even remember. But it's a month or so ago. It's actually something. Yeah, exactly. You start to get to this point of a new frontier, because I think it's the idea of a migration is so ingrained in what we are as people. Like if our buildings are burning, to quote David Foster Wallace, we eventually got to have to migrate. And the same thing that happens with everyday migration: people migrate, birds migrate, species migrate. We also have to migrate our ideas somehow, right? It even include foreign legislation. So what I thought about was, the right to die isn't enacted and even respected societally as we want it to. So there are, of course, societies which do respect the right to die. One example being Switzerland, another example being Belgium, another example being the Netherlands, maybe lesser than Switzerland. But there are foreign governments, foreign judiciaries, legislational acts that does bind the idea of a non-medical model to the right to die, which is the ultimate model that we want. The problem is, well, the good thing for us, but the problem is that most of these authorities do not bind it by including foreigners, as with the Netherlands or Belgium. So Luxembourg also have their own stake on the right to die. Switzerland is the only government, the Swiss Federation is the only, a model that does include foreigners, potential foreigners. That's why they have Dignitas. But I started to think, well, they got Dignitas, they got Pegasus, they got Life Circle, they got X International. That's good and well, but why can't we approach private doctors in Switzerland? I mean, the model is open for euthanasia, of course. Why can't we approach private people to get the process less laborious, less financially laborious, less financially costly a dear? Why can't we get private representatives like lawyers, people? Well, we could obviously cut the cost. We could cut the cost somewhat, but Dignitas operates, and I think here is my response to play the devil's advocate, is the reason is legally. The reason organizations exist in Switzerland is to protect the private physicians legally so that they don't get prosecuted. But that could be usurped by including these legal representatives could also be found less costly on a private matter. For example, if you have a private doctor in, let's say, Switzerland, who are willing to perform the procedure, they say they have done it before, they're willing to perform it, and they're willing to bind by the Swiss rights model to do that, then they would pretty be sure that they won't get prosecuted, right? Now, if you could somehow invoke other Swiss residents or people who are very knowledgeable about the Swiss laws, maybe retired statesmen, who knows? Maybe people in their final years of LLB studies, maybe the list could go on, but people knowledgeable to protect the physicians who want to procure such a decision, who want to help someone. So now you have a private physician in Switzerland willing to abide by the model of the Swiss government, the rights model, of course, and you have private people who can represent this person, who do it for favor giving. They don't ask money. They probably ask, they will do most legwork. Now, how do you get free service in terms of legal advice? It's not easy, but it's possible. retard people, retard judges, retard statespeople, people in their final years of study will ask a lot less to represent people. You could look into that, but I think there's less restrictive ways of dipping down in the cost of 10,000 francs. And if this could be done, this process would be a lot better, because it's the money. Money is the problem. That's actually the biggest problem why we can't qualify. It's not the legal hurdles. It's the financial hurdles that can qualify people to go to Dignitas, International, etc. So if we could somehow cut down the financial hurdles, it would be a massive step forward.
Absolutely.
And we can look at ways to do that. I mean, for instance, creating a group and saying, we are calling, and here's the thing, funding, we can also create a funding scheme. What about the celebrities who are interested in the right to die? Aren't they willing to create a donation? Are you telling me that there's people out there who are not willing to fund this movement? I'm pretty sure there's going to be one person that could invest some billions into this movement, that could represent that money could be used for legal costs. And driving as a stake, this is where the stakeholder thing comes in. We can create stakeholders, we obviously have to approach stakeholders who are willing to invest into this movement, to drive the pricing down for people who can't afford it. And then you can ask, what's the incentives? Well, the incentives is altruistically motivated, but also because everyone might need other people in the movement. Even these statespeople might meet other people who will represent them again. So it will be a consolidated, altruistic, a movement that starts to happen. And you won't need to approach your national legislation. You can just go abroad, because if you do, you can do application-wise. You can say, I'm Betty from Jamaica, and I have such and such. Fair enough. Make contact with the legal team. Send in your application. They will take care of it. They will push that to the federation. They will say to them, "There's Betty from so and so country, and she's terminally ill. She's mentally ill. She really wants to die." Then they will pass it back because of state law. They will pass it back to the senators. The judiciary will look at it and say, "Okay, lawyer X, you need to make sure that this is fulfilled, that is fulfilled," and this will be done because there will be people in this movement willing to do the legwork for whoever is Betty in Ghana or Kenya, wanting to die. So there will be people there will be a lot of people who are willing to do this altruistically with, it will be like a philanthropy. These people will do it for reduced costs.
Right.
Maybe these people won't even ask for anything. Who knows? But the point is, we need to get away from Dignitas and those extreme powerhouses, financial powerhouses, because these people make it ridiculously hard for anyone who don't have that money. We're not part of the what's that circle called that Switzerland, Germany, the Schengen countries. Those people have the financial capital to go, but what about everyone else? The only way I can think about is to approach stakeholders who are willing to invest into a group, to create a non-profit group like what the ProLifers, they're doing this. That's how they get this to rich. Non-profit doesn't mean you don't get rich from it. You can do the same thing with this thing.
Yeah,
and you can drive
absolutely.
the cost down.
I
don't see where the problem is.
I don't know. I think I just want to say like a quick little follow up, and then I'll hand it over to Danny and Kevin. I'm sorry, but I just want to say I think this is a potentially extremely potent idea, and one of the things that inspired this podcast was our conversations with our mutual friend Laith Malik Reem, who's from Lebanon and who's very active in the antinatalist and right to die movements in the Arabic speaking world, where there's no hope of this movement in much of it, and one of the things that sort of drove us to do this was like, how do you give voice to that, these parts of the world where there's no access to the right to die whatsoever. And something like this, I think, really could possibly be a way forward, for those parts of the world where it's literally there's no other way. So yeah, I think you've come upon something that's really could be a very, very potent as far as a future.
Thank you very much, Amanda.
I think the reality that we all have to face is that our movement is very ahead of its time, and this is going to take decades to, if ever, and that's the problem. I mean, we all want it to happen overnight, and I definitely get the urgency or understand the urgency, but it's like, yeah, being ahead of your time is difficult. You know, it's like I would compare it to supporting gay marriage circa 1900. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So this could be 100, you know, something that could take effect 100 years, and I want it to happen as soon as possible. And I do see it, you know, maybe in 30 years, you know, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Switzerland will, you know, see euthanasia or the right to die as a universal human right. And I do think, you know, it's going to take longer for other countries to catch up, but I think eventually they will. But yeah, I mean, you know, you have a very interesting take, and I think that all ideas should be discussed. But yeah.
I agree with Danny 100%, and that's really, really well said. I think it's an absolutely uphill battle that we're facing. I don't think Sisyphean, but close. And I think it's going to take a really long time, and that's why I think it's so important that, you know, this conversation isn't just amongst the terminally ill. It's not just amongst people with a physical illness and people with mental illness. That's why it's so important, I think, to enhance it and grow it as a social movement, and to make, again, invest in infotainment around it, and put it in people's hands. It's in very, very few people's hands at this point. And the more hands it gets into, the more it becomes a natural conversation amongst globally, amongst young people, amongst people that it just isn't taking groups where it just is not taking place yet, you know, and trying to put it in their hands, I think is of the utmost importance.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, Amanda, I think I want to kind of wing on this one, is it's a bigger, you know, the right to die is a small fish in a large ocean of problems, right? I mean, it goes back to, it pedals back to this idea of self-assurance and, you know, extrapolating your own human rights. I mean, the right to die is a small compartment in human rights activism, right? And that goes back to egalitarian rights activism. So it's a big model, and you can probably escape things like negative utilitarianism. You know, you're an anti-natalist. You understand this concept of reducing suffering in the world, aggregate suffering, the idea of the lesser evil approach. Interesting, David Benatar is a South African. He's in, I think he's South African stuff.
He is.
He's an African, yeah. So I'm Kenyan. So but he, you know, one of the pioneers in the right to die, or the idea of he's also right to die. I think he's for the idea of assisted suicide and stuff. But he is the pioneer of, well, not the pioneer, I would say, you know, the decade, almost like our century min of antinatalism. He definitely is one of the biggest name in antinatalism, which is interesting to think that, you know.
Yeah, he brought it to the forefront in the modern era, you know.
Exactly, well, yeah. The paradigm, he's almost like the paradigm man for that, yep.
Speaking of people that are, you know, influential, you mentioned in some emails that you were in contact with people like Philip Nitschke and some other Dutch groups, I think. And would you like to care to expand on your relationship with them, or any contacts? And have you tried convincing them of your awesome ideas or anything? You don't have to share if you don't want.
No, I would love to, guys. Yeah, I've gotten pretty far, I believe. I have talked to a couple people, including, I've talked to Derek Humphrey as well. But I think the problem with these people, they get bombarded with emails, and I think my later emails weren't read by these people. But yeah, I definitely did have a conversation, two-way conversation with these people, and I think this is a very, like, the ideas that I posited was, the first one was foreign legislation. And by the way, my second idea of approaching the state and the constitution also goes to foreign, like, you could also approach foreign state and legislation about importing stuff into their countries for you know. So I was using that as an idea, as almost like a breadboard idea,
that could also be used should all options fail. He can at least talk to freaking somebody in some country, some state senator with an individual request. So that was my second idea that I think is pretty on the dot, because even though I thought your country might be opposed to the idea of approaching as someone in high seat or high tenor, I thought that idea could at least be extrapolated to approach anybody in any country that might be open to, to helping some foreigner. So I just thought about ways to. It's not obviously this is not just a kitchen sink approach. I meant this as a potential way of leveraging. So yeah, I did, however, host my ideas to a couple of people, and a lot of these people were positive about implementing that. I've also asked for, they told me, I think in each case they told me that they haven't thought about it before. And yeah, I just think that this is interesting because, like, how did the company like Dignitas start? And they're working closely with, with the Swiss Federation and the seats in the Swiss. So we know that those people are very open to even individual cases, and they would be open to foreign individual cases. So I did pose this as well to people like, Derek Humphrey. I've talked to Derek Humphrey a couple of times about these issues, and he didn't give me a very long regarded response. I think he was very busy at the time. I talked to a couple, I can't even remember, but I did talk a couple months ago to a couple other people about this. And yeah, it's interesting though, guys, because I just thought, like, if something's bad, really bad is happening to each, to some of us, how are we going to approach this issue? And maybe I'm too erratic about this thing. Maybe I just want everything to do, everything right now, and it's not really the way the world works. And I understand it. I shouldn't be impatient, but I kind of want an answer sooner than later. I want this thing to change. I want to see the shift. Absolutely. That's happening. I want to be able to see that. I want to live in that generation to see the shift. And I hope that the millennials, I do have a hope that it's a millennial thing. We start to question. I just love the 1990s. I love our 90s kids. We have an awesome freaking generation. I think we are just a natural questioning generation. I just love 90s. I just love everything about the 1990s. But I think we're such a extremely expansive terminological generation who are willing to look at new fronts, new ways of acquiring, or suck into ways of acquiring new things, and questioning old values and old customs. I think we're a natural generation who does these things, and this is exactly why the old people hated us. And I think the Right to Die is just one of those examples. It does, however, is a footprint of the 1990s to me, of a millennial.
Absolutely.
And, yeah.
Believe me, we are all impatient. We want this to happen now. But yeah, and I definitely understand the urgency. But it is, like I said, it is frustrating to be at the finish line of this, and we're trying to cheer everyone to catch up.
Yeah, no right to die activist wants to be told, well, it might take 100 years. Because all of our individual clocks are ticking, and for each of us, it's an emergency, and there's going to be all these future people. Yeah. And so, yeah, I completely understand.
Sorry, I just wish the governments would not be calling themselves democratic anymore, because we know it's not really true. Right? They're not really democratic. They don't really believe in our rights as people. Who are we? I just wish that they would stop. They're all freaking fascist anyway. I mean, this is the Right to Die is clearly showing how extremely fascist the governments are, like our governments are, even in democratic quote unquote countries, how extremely self-centric these people are, and how people lost the ability to be human in high chairs. Like, if only these people were just more human, this wouldn't have happened. We would have had a voice. Yeah, this is wishful thinking. I know. Maybe I can have my peace and just have a bit of wishful thinking, because 4 years of battling this thing wasn't easy, or even having discussions about this thing was really not easy. But yeah, guys, I think, yeah, we won't have democracy anytime soon with this thing. And
no, but I think regardless, you You have a lot of really great ideas that have inspired some fantastic thought, at the very least, by the three of us, and I'm sure many of our listeners. So I think you're an important voice in the evolution of this as a movement. So yeah,
I second that. You have a lot of ideas that that should be thought about and looked into, and yeah, I mean it's really interesting. And yes, I agree. You are an important voice to make the change, even if it won't happen as quickly as we want it to.
I appreciate the condolences, guys, and I also wanted to say that it would be nice in a couple of months, for instance, to join again, because we're always researching.
Sure.
We're each and every one of us are researching and finding new ways, new frontiers, new means, and it would be nice to in the future get together again and discussing what we found. Discussing how our evolutions, like the evolution in your country, in your states, have gone about, and it would be nice to meet again and to discuss this. And you guys are lovely, man. I tell you, you're such a lovely group of people, and you have so much to share. I love your channel, man. Like, really.
Thank you, and I'd love that. I'm certainly down. Meet again.
Actually, I was actually thinking about having you on again sometime. I just yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth.
Meatloaf, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate Sam, like your time and everything you had to say, and they really are unique. They're something that I think a lot of people don't think about, because, a lot of people don't think about this whole topic in general, but to get into the real specifics about it is really cool to hear. And it's been awesome, to hang out with you.
Okay, so I think, unfortunately, sadly, we've come to the end of our time together today. I want to thank Sam so much for all of your time and for answering all of our questions and for the wonderful conversation today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Everybody listening, please go to the YouTube channel, link below, me and the other I, and subscribe to Sam for more excellent content. Sam, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. We'll be back with another episode before you know it.
Likewise, guys, thank you so much for having me on your channel. I'm very, very pleased to be, to get to know all of you lovely people, and thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and have a great day further, eh?
Pleasure as
always. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Yes, it was
Thanks, guys.
very stimulating, and you have brought a lot to the table.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate this, Dan. Thank you so much.
You have been listening to the Right to No Longer Exist, a Right to Die podcast. We hope that you have enjoyed your time and found the information valuable. Please visit us at therighttonolongerexist.com to learn more about our organization and mission statement.
You can also follow us on all of the main social media platforms at The Right to No Longer Exist. There you will find links to our individual channels as well.
If you would like to contact us directly, please email info@therighttonolongerexist.com. Thank you for your time, and let's remember that during the time that it took to listen to this podcast, dozens, if not hundreds of people endured a horrific death by suicide. Let's fight together for a world where this doesn't happen anymore. See you next time on the Right to No Longer Exist podcast.